You've probably seen them everywhere, right? Personality tests, maybe on social media, maybe even in a job interview. And the big one, the Myers-Briggs or MBTI, has become this global phenomenon. It's a super quick way to slap a label on who we are. But is that really the whole story?
NFP, ENTP, ISTJ. Do any of these look familiar? Yeah, I thought so. You see them on dating profiles, LinkedIn bios, everywhere. They're supposed to be this little window right into our soul.
And that really brings us to the big question we're digging into today. Do these 4 little letters actually define who you are? Or is there something more going on? Let's get into it.
To get a sense of just how powerful these tests are, just look at this number. A whopping 80% of Fortune 100 companies use personality tests for hiring and for managing their employees. So yeah, this is way more than just a social media trend. It is a massive corporate industry.
So why? Why are the biggest companies in the world so bought into this? Well, from their point of view, it's kind of like they're searching for a talent code. A simple way to crack the puzzle of human personality, all for the benefit of the bottom line.
And if you look at it from a business angle, you can kind of see the logic. Companies want to hire faster. They want to find the right fit for a job. And they want to build teams that just click. They see these tests as a shortcut, a tool for efficiency that promises to predict how you'll behave and perform. It's really an attempt to manage people with a simple, almost scientific-seeming formula.
But okay, what does this feel like from the other side of the desk? For an employee, or a potential employee, it's not about efficiency at all. It can feel like a high-stakes psychological battle.
So one of the most common responses is to just conform, to try and game the system. As commentator Ma Jahawi puts it here, you don't really answer honestly. Instead, you try to figure out the personality you think they're looking for, and then you pick your answers to match that. It's a strategy, really, a strategy of adaptation.
But then you've got the total opposite reaction, captured perfectly here by Chen Liu. Resistance. You just refuse. You see the test as an invasion of your privacy. You start questioning its legitimacy, its fairness, and even the company's right to try and profile you. This isn't about adapting, it's about defiance. So you've got these two really natural defense mechanisms popping up, conforming or resisting. One is driven by this desire to fit in, to get the job, to succeed. The other is driven by a need to protect your own identity from being shoved into a little box.
Okay, so we've seen the company's side and the employee's side. But what do the experts say? Is there any actual science behind these 4-letter codes that have such a huge say in our careers? Let's take a look at the evidence.
A huge reason these tests feel so accurate is something called the Barnum effect. It's this tendency we all have to accept really vague, general descriptions as if they were written just for us. Like a result might say, you have a great need for other people to admire you. And you think, wow, that's me, but that's almost everybody. It's a neat little psychological trick that makes us feel seen, even when the statements are totally universal. And get this, the history of the MBTI itself doesn't exactly scream scientific credibility. It was created by a mother and daughter, and neither of them had any formal training as psychologists. And later, when the precursor to the CIA tried using it to screen for spies, you know what their official conclusion was? Not very useful. Ouch.
And this brings us to a really, really important distinction in testing: reliability versus validity. See, a test is reliable if you get the same result pretty much every time you take it. And the MBTI is actually pretty reliable in that sense. But is it valid? Does it actually measure what it says it's measuring? And more importantly, does it actually predict job performance? Well, the overwhelming consensus from academic psychologists is nope. Its validity is, let's just say, highly questionable.
So, let's just recap. We have companies using a tool with questionable validity, and we have employees who are either trying to game the system or are flat out resisting it. So, where does that leave us? How do we get beyond the label to find the real self?
Ironically, maybe the best answer comes from Carl Jung himself, the psychologist whose theories inspired the whole thing in the first place. He said every individual is an exception. He got it. He knew that while we can create categories, human personality is just way too complex, way too fluid to be locked into a single framework forever.
So what's the big takeaway here? How should we deal with these things? Well, a healthier approach seems to have a few key steps. First, treat these tests as a starting point, a way to kick off some self-reflection, but definitely not as a final verdict. Second, always remember their scientific limits.
Third, never let a label define or limit what you think you can do or who you can become. And finally, remember that you are defined by what you do, your actions, not by a four-letter code.
Because when it comes down to it, the real power of these tools isn't in the answer they spit out at the end. It's in the questions they make you ask yourself along the way. The true value isn't finding a label. It's about starting a conversation with yourself about who you are and, more importantly, who you want to be.
And that brings us right back to where we started. When you're faced with these tests, you can conform, you can resist, or you can just use them as a moment to reflect. The choice is yours. So I'll leave you with this question. When a tool tries to define you, how are you going to respond?